Okay. Well, everyone, my camera is being wonky. It's not working, but that's okay. It's about the speaker anyway. So thank you all for coming out tonight to the 5th Spring 2021 meeting of the Florida State University chapter of the International Association of Emergency Managers. Tonight, our speaker will be Mike Gaskins. Mike graduated from Southeastern Louisiana University. He's worked as a special project manager for the Inner City Fund, as a program manager for a consulting firm IAEM, and he's currently the vice president of business development and programs with Hammerman Gainer LLC. And so he's got a lot of extensive experience in disaster recovery. He's going to be talking a lot about disaster recovery tonight, kind of like a 101 talk on it, some history, the processes, recovery projects, and also cover some professional development that's going to be really valuable for us being students. And so, Mike, thank you so much for being here tonight. We're so glad you're here, and I now pass the floor over to you.
I appreciate that, Stefan, and thank you guys for asking me to do this. So I've done this before for Florida State. I thoroughly enjoy this, and I'm deeply honored that I get asked to present. For the life of me, sometimes I don't know why. However, that being said, I do look forward, and like Stefan said, we're going to cover some things tonight, and I'm going to give y'all some real world perspective on things. And I think that's always a challenge when you're a student, because look, been there, done that. All right. And I know that when I was a student, you're sitting there learning about all these applications and all this fancy stuff, and this is how things are. And I was a marketing major, and we learned about the 4 Ps, and you just, there are a lot of things that you learn when you're in school. And then the question becomes, it's kind of like, you take algebra in high school, and who among us has ever said, I'll never use that again? Because, you learn stuff, and sometimes you feel like you're learning it just for the sake of learning it. But there is real world application in which you guys are learning. In addition, though, I'm going to explain to y'all how, again, kind of how the real world works in this, because I don't think students get the exposure as to, number one, what to anticipate in the real world. Because, I mean, look, I was a student for 7 years. Apparently, I love being a student. And it's not because I was afraid of the real world. I just like being a student. But when I went out into the real world, one of the things I noticed, even when I was in school, there wasn't a whole lot of professional guidance out there. There wasn't a whole lot of, hey, when you graduate, here's some recommendations of things you should do, things you shouldn't do. So you get thrown to the wolves kind of willy-nilly, and you don't know which way to go. So hopefully I can give y'all a little guidance on that as well. But also, again, disaster recovery, we know that there are always disasters, okay? So there's always a need for people who can specialize in some form of disaster recovery, whatever that may be. And we'll cover some of those as well this evening. So that being said, I will tell y'all I am very technically challenged. I'm going to attempt to share my screen right now. And hopefully,
oh, here, I think I get it.
No, you gotta let me share screen.
There it is.
I pull up my little thing. Oh, hey, yay. Woo. Let's see. Okay, give me 1 sec, because I am very technically challenged. Here we go. So everybody should be able to, can y'all see my screen now? It should be showing a big slide that says Hammerman Gainer.
Yeah, we see that.
All right. So first off, let me kind of start off with me and Hammerman Gainer. So as Stefan said, Southeastern Louisiana University, small school here in Louisiana. They actually specialize in education and nursing, one of the best education and nursing schools in the South. And have been known for that for years and years and years. And I just happened to go into marketing because I couldn't make up my mind about what I wanted to be when I grew up. Anyway, so I've been in disaster recovery for 15 years now. I started as a result of Hurricane Katrina, and as a result of, I was in the mortgage industry before that. The mortgage industry crashed and burned and had to get into something else. So disaster recovery happened to be there because of Katrina. And I had a skill set that initially fed well into what they were doing. They needed subject matter experts. I happen to have been one from the mortgage side of the world, knowing about appraisals and properties and insurances and all these great things you learn when you do home loans. So it fed well into what I was doing. Hammerman and Gainer, this is actually my second stint with Hammerman and Gainer. So when I came into disaster recovery, I started, as Stefan said, with ICF. And ICF was the company who got the contract for Katrina in the beginning. These disaster recovery contracts generally last 2 to 3 years. And at the end of that time, you either are invited to try to win the work again, or you're suddenly told, don't come back. ICF as a company in the state of Louisiana had some issues and butted heads on a couple things. So HGI came in. I ended up working for HGI. The Hurricane Katrina project itself lasted 12 years. That is unheard of in this, 12 years. But Hammerman and Gainer comes in and they get the contract. So as this shows, Hammerman and Gainer has 90 years of service delivering solutions you can depend on. But when we talk more about Hammerman and Gainer and kind of what they are, Hammerman and Gainer, and I'm gonna pimp out my company for a sec here. We are the largest African-American-owned TPA, which is third-party administrator and business outsourcing firm in the United States. HGI has been at the forefront of disaster recovery, assistance, administration for over 15 years, providing response, relief, and reconstruction services on many major federal disaster programs since '06, including Katrina, Rita, Sandy, the 2016 Louisiana floods, and COVID response. Some of these names obviously ring a bell with y'all, okay? Obviously, if somebody says Katrina, we all know Katrina, right? I mean, everybody knows Katrina. Sandy, another one. Everybody knows Sandy. Rita came a month after Katrina and hit, so Katrina came in and hit Southeast Louisiana. Rita hit Southwest Louisiana, and Rita came in as a Cat 5. The 2016 Louisiana floods, those in 2016, and it happened to have impacted me at my house. In March, we had a 500-year flood. In August, we had a 1,000-year flooding event. Again, unheard of, insane. Never happened before, okay? But we also do COVID response as well. And again, as we get through this, I'll kind of touch on that because COVID is a disaster. Make no doubt about it, COVID is a disaster. But as far as Hammerman and Gainer goes, we come in and when the states get the funding for work to be done, we're one of the companies that bids on the work and ideally wins it all, but you can't win everything, but we win work. So we are an outfit that for 90 years we've been in existence. We started as a third-party administrator, and what that means is you handle funding for agencies that can't handle funding for themselves. When the funding amounts become so large, agencies have to find somebody to handle the disbursement, because the reality is government, as big as government is, and my gosh, it is huge, it doesn't have the bandwidth it needs to do a lot of this work. So that's where firms like Hammerman and Gainer come into play. ICF, again, another company I work for. IAEM, another company I work for. That is why we are in existence, okay? Because number one, and trust me, I don't consider myself one of these people, but you get the absolute best and brightest in the industries who can help you out and help steer programs in the right direction, okay? And number two, government cannot afford people like that. The reality is there are people out there that are incredibly smart that if governments could afford to hire them, they should and they would, but the reality is they can't. And private industry, not trying to state the obvious, but you make more money in private industry than you do working for the government. So, but again, this gives y'all a little idea as to who we are as far as Hammerman and Gainer. So let's talk, guys, about the emergency management cycle. I've met a lot of the people that study international affairs and emergency management at Florida State, and I know that they teach all a lot, okay? They really and truly teach all a lot of information, but in its most simplistic form, the emergency cycle All communities are in at least one phase of the emergency management cycle at any given time. And this, in particular, coastal states, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, all the way up the eastern seaboard, even West Coast states. Then people in the middle who deal with other types of disasters. All communities at any point in time or at some point in the emergency management cycle. This cycle, you notice, guys, it's a circular cycle, okay? So circles have no beginning and no end, right? So, but ideally where you like to start is mitigation. And I'll tell you how this all feeds together. So mitigation is to prevent or reduce impact. So if your community is in the mitigation phase, you're looking at ways to reduce or prevent impact from disasters, okay? Good example of this would be a coastal community that maybe hasn't been hit by a hurricane for some time, but they're looking around to see what's happened and realize we need to beef up our seawalls for storm surge. We can't handle what's coming. That is mitigation. Doing what you can to reduce impact. It may be that they're instituting new building codes, having seen what's occurred in disasters. It may be in California, they have instituted building codes regarding earthquakes, or maybe they're looking at utilizing flame retardant materials on houses in areas that are affected more frequently by wildfires. But that is the mitigation part of the cycle. Next one is preparedness. Planning and training for events that can't be mitigated. So I'm going to use Katrina as a great example. You can try to plan for a Cat 5 coming your way, but the reality is nobody knows what to expect. You really and truly don't. It's nature. If we learned anything last year, and you please go look at all the hurricane tracks, we learned that nature's unpredictable, because the reality is the tracks themselves, you can't pinpoint the exact track of a hurricane. And the mayor of Pensacola said it better than anybody I heard after Sally, because people in Pensacola were boo-hooing after Sally. Nobody told us about storm surge. Mayor came on TV and they were bashing the heck out of Weather Channel and NOAA and Hurricane Center and everybody else. And the mayor said, look, if you grew up on the Gulf Coast and there's a storm in the Gulf of Mexico, be ready. We all know that. Everybody knows that. We're all grown up, hopefully, having learned that fact. Always be ready. Don't sit there and look at this cone, okay? So preparedness means, how do we plan? What do we do in the event that something's coming? And in the event of Katrina, there was nothing, you can't stop a storm, okay? But you can plan for a storm coming without a doubt, and you can prepare for the storm coming. And in Louisiana, we years ago came up with contraflow. So we instituted contraflow to get people out of potentially impacted areas, where all lanes of the interstate went in the same direction. Didn't matter. I-10 East, I-10 West. It all went west. Okay? We have two north-south interstates. They all went north. So that is your preparedness phase. Also, making sure that you have assets that you can stage in the event of a disaster. Always making sure you have assets available. That is preparedness. Then there's response. So that means a disaster hit. So what do? Response that takes place in the immediate aftermath of a disaster. So you think about when a disaster happens, and we use a hurricane as a great example because all of us are in a hurricane area. So a hurricane hits, there's a response effort that happens. First thing that happens, obviously, is your first responders are out in the field trying to help people, trying to rescue people, doing what they need to do. Then you have the immediate attempt at restoration of power. That is critical. So that is part of response as well. Then you have organizations like the Red Cross who come out, who are offering clothing and food to those people who lost everything they owned, okay? You're trying to take care of immediate needs. Also included in response is FEMA. FEMA is part of response. And FEMA really is the first tranche of funding that comes down after a disaster. FEMA gets funding to come in and help folks out. And what FEMA's goal is once they get past that immediate impact, now they've got to look at some little bit longer term, but still in the overall picture, short-term impacts. And that is ensuring people have safe and habitable housing. Safe and habitable housing comes from FEMA. That comes in the form of blue tarps on roof. That comes in the form of FEMA providing FEMA trailers. That comes in the form of FEMA doing something like a STEP or shelter in place program, where FEMA comes into your affected house. They make sure that your roof does not leak. They ensure that you have a working sink. If you don't, they provide you one. They make sure that you have some type of cooktop to provide food for your family. They make sure that you have some type of refrigerator so you can keep the food cool. They make sure that you have a functioning air conditioning so nobody dies of heat. And because Lord knows, those of us that have been through hurricanes, once power goes out, the next few days, it's hot. The air doesn't move. It's like the hurricane sucks all the wind with it, and then there's no air movement for days and days and days. So that's what FEMA does. FEMA also provides money for hotel assistance and temporary rental assistance to individuals. But again, that's the end goal of safe and habitable housing for people after a disaster. The final phase of the emergency management cycle is recovery. That is restoration efforts and reducing vulnerability. Restoration efforts comes from HUD. So FEMA provides funding during response. HUD allocates funding for recovery. So it's two different agencies. FEMA is short-term. HUD comes in for long-term recovery, and that's the long-term building efforts. That's going in and actually fixing someone's house permanently. That may be building someone a new house. That may be replacing someone's mobile home with a new mobile home. So again, HUD comes in for long-term recovery. And it's the HUD recovery efforts that take 3 years. In the case of Katrina, it took 12 years. And I'll explain to y'all why when we get to that. But this is the breakdown of the emergency cycle. But again, as I mentioned, guys, it's a circle. So even recovery feeds into mitigation. And the reason it does is because one of the things HUD provides are mitigation funds. So when funding comes down from Congress and passes through FEMA, it is restoration funding for people's houses. There's a homeowner funding aspect of that. But there is also funding aspects for mitigation, and that is to prevent future damages, which means it's less money Congress has to allocate for the next storm if it is done correctly. And there are also infrastructure fundings that come into this as well. So again, it all kind of feeds in this beautiful circle where at any point in time, all communities are somewhere within the emergency management cycle. So Cdbg comes from HUD, and this is what my real specialty is. There's FEMA funding, and again, that's short term. I'm a long-term guy. I like the longevity of projects, but that's me. And I like dealing with the HUD aspect. HUD is long-term recovery. So, team, if we look at this, we have CDBG DR, that's CDBG disaster recovery. And what that means is when the president declares a major disaster, Congress may appropriate funds to the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which is HUD, when there are significant unmet needs for long-term recovery. The allocation of funds is published under a Federal Register notice. This notice breaks down the allocated funds per grantee per disaster, and the grantees are the states. So when there is a disaster and Congress allocates funding to HUD for that disaster, that funding is then passed down to the states. And what can those funds be used for? Well, the appropriation provides funds to the most impacted and distressed areas for disaster relief, long-term recovery, restoration of infrastructure, housing, economic revitalization, and what's not on here are a couple of other areas that I'll touch on, and that would be mitigation efforts. In addition, within the long-term recovery and the housing, they also get specific to the types of housing that you're able to fix. So homeowners is one. The other would be rental units, because hurricanes are indiscriminate as far as the type of house. If you're living in a brick house or if you're living in an apartment complex, the hurricane doesn't care, okay? If you're living out in a real nice fancy apartment complex, or if you're living in Section 8 housing, the hurricane doesn't care, okay? So this HUD funding comes in, and it's to help with all of these areas. Now, there are requirements for CDBG disaster recovery funds. These funds are designed to help people who make less than 80% of the average median income. What that means is federal funding for disasters that come down from HUD, this really is to help people who don't have the financial means to help themselves. These are people who don't have the income, who can't afford to go get another home loan, who may not have had insurance, or if they did have insurance, they may not have been able to afford good insurance. Their deductible may have been too high. This is to help folks who truly do not have the ability, the financial ability to help themselves. This is a good thing. This is going into impacted and distressed areas and helping folks have housing. Housing is our most basic need. If we need nothing else, you have to have a roof over your head first. Shelter. Shelter is the number one thing you have to find. Then comes water, then comes food, and then comes all the rest of it. But you have to have shelter. So the purpose of these programs is to ensure people have shelter. And again, this is for folks who make less than 80% of the average median income. And on a lot of these programs, we take it down even lower than that, okay? But this is a HUD requirement. This isn't the state of Florida. This isn't the state of Louisiana. This isn't the state of Texas. This is the federal government stating those are the individuals who can get this assistance. So that's what CDBG disaster recovery funds can be used for. Now, how does all this start? And how do we decide how much funding comes down? So as I mentioned, FEMA is the first federally funded piece of the response aspect of this. FEMA comes and the president declares disasters, and FEMA says, yep, that's a disaster. Yep, that's a disaster. So FEMA issues disaster declarations. And what I've got on the next couple slides are tables of the disaster declarations from last year. And there are a couple from this year just because January was real wonky with the ice storms. But what is really fascinating, and again, I mean, we were all in Florida, so we know all about the hurricanes that hit last year and everything that had occurred. But when you look at this and look at the places across the United States that had declared disasters, we have Hurricane Delta in Louisiana. We have the derecho and severe storms in Iowa, earthquake in Puerto Rico, earthquake in Utah, flooding in North Dakota, flooding in Washington, flooding in Oregon, flooding in Puerto Rico, flooding and landslides in Alaska, flooding and a levee break in Michigan, Isaias. We all remember when Isaias came in because, good Lord, it was comical watching the Weather Channel try to pronounce the name of the storm. So Isaias comes in, Isaias hit 7 states. 7 states had a declared disaster from that one hurricane. One hurricane, 7 states. And truthfully, I don't even think they're through declaring on that one yet. You had Hurricane Laura come into Louisiana and Texas. Sally, and we all know about Sally and the impact in Pensacola and what Sally did in Alabama. And this is all public information, okay? So that's something else. Any one of you on this call tonight can pull up Google and Google FEMA declared disasters of 2020, and you can all see this. This is all public information. There's no secret to it. In my role for business development, this is what I go look at. Because truthfully, my goal, my job is to find out where the next piece of work is coming from. And this tells me where the work is coming from. This tells me that now I'm not going to do it because it's too far away, but North Dakota is going to get some funding. Okay, maybe I go talk to somebody in North Dakota about getting some work up there. Not going to do it. Don't know anybody in North Dakota. Don't want to go that far away. But use this as an example. And then really the interesting piece in all of this that I think is really kind of interesting is this area right here, IA approved. That's individual assistance. Individual assistance means FEMA's cutting checks to folks who had damages to their house. That helps drive how the Congress allocates funding to HUD. If individual assistance was approved, that means there are homes that were owned by individuals that were impacted by these events. And this, more than anything, from a business side of things, helps drive where you want to go look for the business. But the other thing it does is it really shines a light on the amount of disasters that occurred last year. And there's this growing trend of more and more disasters every year. And it's not something you want to see. But the reality is, it's the weather, and we can work to mitigate against the effects. So the folks in these states will get mitigation money. They can work to mitigate against future disasters. That is a great step. They also know that, use Washington State as an example. They had a flooding event on January 20th, 2020, okay? That flooding event impacted 15 counties in the state of Washington. It's not that many, it's 15 counties. All the other counties, though, realize we better be prepared. So it feeds into preparedness and the planning. See, all this feeds together, and it's a beautiful cycle. But this is only part of it for 2020, guys. Here's the rest of 2020. And the font's a little bit small because, truth be told, there were so many events, I couldn't get it all on one page or make it look worth a dang. But you look at this, and there was so much flooding across the country. And a lot of this came from small storms, just nothing we would ever expect. Just weather events moving across the country and slowing down and just dumping copious amounts of rain on areas that truthfully can't handle it. They may have not, again, like me, 2016, I'll be honest, I never expected to see my neighborhood underwater where I live. That was the furthest thing from my mind. Maybe if a Cat 5 hit just right and I had storm surge, maybe that's a possibility. I mean, it's remote, but it's a possibility. I never expected the flooding we had, a 500-year flood. And if you tried to tell me I was going to get a 1,000-year flood in August of the same year, I'd bet money on that is no, but it happened. And you look at these tornadoes, wildfires, windstorms, winter storms. My gosh, Hurricane Zeta that hit Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. You look at the trajectories of these storms and what these things do, and it is interesting. And this points out that the field that y'all have elected to study in school, there is value. There is a future in this from an employment perspective. You also get the benefit of helping people. And it sounds a little bit corny, but I have been very fortunate to have helped a number of individuals. When I run programs, I'm helping people by the thousands, and that's one thing. When I was working Katrina, I was very fortunate to have met a lot of individuals and took ownership of wanting to assist these people and was able to make a difference in some people's lives. And that matters. And I'm going to tell y'all something. That is something that a lot of people don't ever get in any career. But I can promise you it is something I will take to my grave, and I will never forget the faces of the people and the stories they told me. I will never, ever forget it. And that matters. But again, from a business side of things, this shows you what the industry is like. This shows you that FEMA has already sent funding for all these, so there are already FEMA job opportunities out there for this. Then there are going to be the Cdbg disaster recovery fundings that come down for these things. It is impressive. It is an area where, truthfully, we don't have enough people in the industry to handle what is coming down. And the fact that Florida State has these programs and they have all of you interested to some degree in this, that is awesome. And that speaks volumes about the future. And it speaks volumes about what your opportunities are out there if you decide to jump into the disaster recovery field. So this shows all the stuff and how FEMA identifies. Okay? And what you'll notice on the left-hand side is there are these numbers attached to these events. These are the disaster numbers. That's important because once FEMA declares disasters, at some point in time, Congress, we all know how well Congress gets along. They do everything so fast, but not really. Congress decides, okay, we need to allocate federal funding through HUD for Cdbg, Community Development Block Grants, in particular for disaster recovery. We need to allocate that money to the states so they can do long-term recovery projects. And as I mentioned before, that is done through a federal register notice. So when that comes out, and generally it takes, here's the frustrating thing in this whole business. I'm going to go off on a tangent and a rant. It takes too damn long, truthfully. Too damn long for this stuff to happen. Hurricane Michael, great example. Okay, Hurricane Michael, October 2018, Michael comes in and does its thing. The funds for Michael were not allocated until, drum roll, 2020. The Michael program just launched, and you guys are in Tallahassee, so you see it on the news program. How in the world does it take over 2 years from a storm to come in and do long-term recovery? Federal government. That's the answer, federal government. It's the most convoluted bunch of red tape garbage in the world. The fact that it takes that long. But kind of at this point, it is what it is. And I don't know that there's any changing that. But anyway, so this all comes down through a Federal Register notice. So what I've attached here next is a copy of a Federal Register notice. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with the storms I showed you on the previous 2 slides, because those are 2020 events. But what this does show is the far left-hand column, disaster year. Disaster number. These are the numbers I showed you on that spreadsheet that FEMA identifies disasters with. So, you know, you look at these and let's use the one up top, 4357, the grantees American Samoa. So funds are allocated not only to actual states, but they're also allocated to territories, okay? So American Samoa, whatever their event was, they ended up getting a total allocation of $23 million for their disaster. State of California, 4407 and 4382. I can tell you these are wildfires because this was 2018, okay? California got $1,017,399,000. So they got $1 billion for wildfires in their allocation. So when this comes out, this is what tells the states, hey, here's how much money you're going to be getting from HUD. The next thing that happens is the states now have to sit there and say, okay, what do we do with this money? And they come up with an action plan. And this is all public information, and you can look these up for every single state. But we'll utilize, let's look at the $1 billion for California. California has to come up with an action plan for this tranche of funding for $1 billion. That action plan says, okay, and I haven't read it, but I'm just going to go based off some percentages that I'm familiar with. Generally, we'll say 70% of your funding goes to housing. So they're going to say, okay, 700 million is going to housing. So we're going to allocate 700 million of this funding to help people rebuild houses or fix their houses from these wildfires. Then the other 300 million that's left, that's going to get broken out between infrastructure and mitigation. So that's how so the state sits there and they come up with this beautiful action plan. It goes out for public comment, and you get all your politicians talking about it, because that's when you get all your local guys. So, for example, when Michael went out, the action plan went out for comment, you had Bay County responding, wanting to know why they weren't getting more than what they were. The city of Panama City is like, well, what about us? We want more money. And that's when everybody gets to come back and say, we should get this, we should get that, because it does go into that degree of detail. It identifies the impacted areas. But then you also get a lot of other organizations trying to chime in. Everybody wants a little piece of the pie. But in the end, it's still the state's money. So they do this action plan. Action plan gets approved, and now you know how the funds are being allocated. So now what they have to do, in Florida, what is utilized is an ITN, or an invitation to negotiate. In other states, it's an RFP, or a request for proposal. And that is a document that goes out. Basically, it's an invitation to all the contractors out there, like HGI, who I work with, to the HGIs, the IAEMs, the ICFs, the Horns, the Haggertys, the KPMGs, all these companies. They get this and they're like, oh, you know what? We'd like to bid on this work. So we come in and we look at what this ITN or RFP says we are required to do. We come up with a plan as to how we will do that. We come up with a list of all the people that we will hire to do that work. And then we come up with a price as to how much it's going to cost us to do it. Put all of that in a pretty package. These are very expensive to do. And we all submit because there's a deadline, and the state gets them all and reviews them. And they have a scoring checklist that they use. And they go through the scoring checklist, and based on the scores, they identify a winner. Now, again, because this is part of a kind of a bid process, people have the right to protest, because Lord knows if you're a loser, you're not happy about losing, and you're going to think of a reason why the winner shouldn't be the winner, and you try to protest, and it adds another couple of weeks to it. while the state pretends like they're really concerned about what you have to say, even though they're probably not, because they spend a lot of time doing this and they're pretty confident in their evaluation. But it's a game that we all play. And then the contract is awarded. Okay, so a company is awarded the work. The work is, and again, I think what y'all are more familiar with, in particular because where you are right now, is what's going on with Michael. People apply for the program, so the contractor takes in all the applications. They determine eligibility. The applicants make sure their income meets the required thresholds, make sure they have damages due to the storms. Sometimes we do environmental reviews, so those are critical, making sure there are no environmental factors that affect the property. And then they come up with a funding allocation for how much it's going to cost to fix each house. And that's really putting programs in a nutshell. But that comes back to this FRN that I'm showing you, because this is where it all starts. From a HUD perspective, this is where it all begins. When HUD says through the FRN, this is how much each state is getting for whatever their respective disasters were, that's how the states know how much they're getting. And I got to be honest, when I first learned about this way back in the day, it was truly eye-opening to me, because I honestly didn't know this is how stuff was done. I'd been in the mortgage industry forever. I truthfully at the time didn't know. I mean, you hear about government contractors, and all you ever hear are the stories of like guys that make screwdrivers for $1,000 and sell them to the Army. I didn't know that this other world existed where there are companies out there providing a benefit and doing all this work. And I never really truly understood what happened after a storm. So this opened my eyes to a whole new industry, and it was thoroughly enlightening. And it's something that I'm so grateful to be a part of at this time. I love what I do. It's exciting. It is different. Every day has its own unique challenges. And I've done a couple different things in my life, and truthfully, I think from a fulfillment perspective, this is really phenomenal. I used to have great fulfillment doing home loans for people that couldn't get home loans and help them first-time home buyers and all that good stuff. But this affects people. This truly affects somebody's life. People are sitting there in houses today with leaky roofs due to a hurricane. Somebody's got to fix it. They can't afford to do it themselves. They truly need help. And that's what this funding is for through this FRN. So this is how the money gets down to the states. And as I mentioned, the action plan is how the states decide how much funding within that state's going to be allocated. So how did we get here? Because it's really important we understand how long it took to get here. So community development block grants in the form for disaster recovery, those in particular were authorized under Title I of the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974. 1974. 47 years ago. 74. That's after two of the most horrific hurricanes in the United States, that being Betsy and Camille. Even obviously way after the one that wiped out the Keys. But 1974 is when the government decided, oh, you know what? Yeah, we should authorize some funding for this. Then in 1988, the Stafford Act was put into law. This is critical because we're jumping ahead 14 years. So 14 years later, the government thought it'd be a good idea to put the Stafford Act in, which allowed a presidential disaster declaration. Okay, and that's what triggered financial assistance and physical assistance from Fema. So 14 years later, somebody has a brilliant idea of, oh, we ought to incorporate this. So that's 1988. We still wait another 4 years, guys. 4 years before Congress first appropriated funds to Cdbg for long-term disaster recovery in 1992. And what was the significant event in 1992? Probably way before most of y'all were born, but I can tell you, it was in Florida. It was Hurricane Andrew. Andrew was the first time a president declared a disaster declaration. 92, we went from 74, okay, 74 with the authorization all the way to 92 before it was actually done. Again, that's federal government at work for you. But 1992 was the first time that the president declared an emergency declaration for a disaster, Hurricane Andrew. When that was done, the funding that came down from the federal government was pushed to the local communities. Because it wasn't just Florida, because if y'all recall, Andrew came in like a buzzsaw through South Florida and leveled everything in its path, came out in the Gulf, weakened a little bit, but for some reason got physically larger, not stronger, and then came into Louisiana, into central Louisiana on the coast, and did tremendous amount of damage there. And Louisiana did the same thing and pushed it out to push the funding to the local communities. So for a really long time, that's how it was done. States were getting funding for disasters and pushing it out to the local communities. Because again, states at that time definitely didn't, they don't have the bandwidth today. They sure in the heck didn't have it back then. It was challenging and it was easier because at that point in time, all the states had to do was monitor. All they had, monitor where the funds went and account for the funds. And that's it. So by pushing it out to the communities, you're relying on community reports coming in telling you how much money they spent. So that was in 92. Then we make the jump in time, 2005, Katrina. And again, it's fascinating that the first time a disaster was ever declared by a president was Andrew. Andrew hit Florida, came into Louisiana. The biggest one to ever be declared, hit Florida, came into Louisiana. That was Katrina in 05. Katrina hit Florida on August 25th of 05 as a Cat 1. She moves across South Florida into the Gulf. She suddenly blows up to a Cat 5. She weakened at landfall to a Cat 3 on August 29th of 05. But she already had the momentum. She already had the storm surge. She pushed in 28 feet of water in storm surge in Louisiana and Mississippi. 28 feet. Stand with a ruler or a tape measure, I guess, and try to figure out what 28 feet is. And then think of a wall of water coming at you like that. It'll blow your mind. There is a 2-story courthouse in South Louisiana, brick building. Storm surge comes in. The courthouse did not get knocked down. Water recedes. There's a pickup truck on the roof from the storm surge. We see all the stuff about New Orleans, but when she came into Mississippi, the amount of water she was pushing took all the casinos and pushed them across the highway. Literally moved buildings. It was unbelievable. When she hit Louisiana, the fascinating thing is she came into where Louisiana comes out into the Gulf where the Mississippi empties. And then she veered off a little bit. And truthfully, everybody's breathing a sigh of relief in New Orleans going, whew, man, talk about dodging a bullet, because that was worst case scenario, a storm coming up the river with the amount of water she was pushing. Luckily for us, she turned. The problem is what they didn't take into account was the amount of water she was pushing westward into Lake Pontchartrain. And that's where the levees broke. And once the levee broke, I mean, we've all been to the beach and we all made our little sandcastle and little moats and stuff and little sand dams. And it doesn't take much water and you start seeing the sand fall away and all of a sudden all the water's coming in. That's what happened in New Orleans. You know, it was horrific. Damage estimates were at $125 billion for Katrina. So after FEMA declares a disaster and they send the FEMA funds down and all that good stuff happens, then it's time for Congress to get its act together and issue the Cdbg disaster recovery funds through HUD. $13.4 billion were allocated to Louisiana for Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. because as I showed you on the previous thing, on the FRN, you can have more than one storm number in an allocation. This is so Congress doesn't have to keep reallocating. They look at the events and they can lump the money together. So then Rita, what about Rita? Rita was a Cat 5 in the Gulf. She weakened down to a Cat 4 at landfall. Rita pushed in 17 plus feet of water into Southwest Louisiana. Wiped out the entire coast. It's gone. I mean, literally wiped it down to nothing. I talked to a lady who lived in Southwest Louisiana. She had storm surge in her house. She was finally able to get back to her house. And I swear, this is, you cannot make this up. Her house sat 12 feet above the ground, 12 feet before the storm. The house survived the storm surge. When she got into her house, she had 3 foot of mud in her house. In her den, in the mud, was a cow. A cow. In her den. I mean, it was dead, but she had a cow in her dang den. She was asking me how I was going to get the cow out. I don't know. I'm wanting to approve you to bulldoze your house. I don't want to deal with a cow in your den. It's easier to knock it over and just push it out the way. But that's what these storms do. Okay. That's so everybody understands what these, I mean, we see it on TV. And I had to evacuate for Ivan, and that's another one, folks, on the Florida coast. Should be really familiar with Ivan in 04. Ivan came in as a Cat 5. Ivan wiped out Pensacola Beach. Ivan wiped out Navarre Beach. Wiped it down to the sand, to the point that you go across the bay at Navarre and Highway 90 was covered with pieces of houses and refrigerators and washing machines and all kinds of stuff up and down the highway that you never would have imagined. Wiped it out. Katrina's making the same path. And they're, initially, 2 days before landfall, they were recommending evacuation. I didn't want to, I thought about not evacuating. I'm like, it's going to curve. They always curve. They always go to the right. Yeah, no. Wake up the next morning, weatherman starts telling me, if you're staying, write social security number and permanent marker on your arm so they can identify your body. And that's like, yeah, no, sorry, we're gone. Everybody load up in the car. We're heading north. And we did. And we boogied out. It is not something you want to be in. But again, having worked the Katrina program, you hear stories. And there's a comment, and there really is a feeling that you're doing something great in this business when you're able to help people out. So it really is a wonderful thing. But with Katrina, $13.4 billion in funding. It's a lot of money, guys. That's a whole lot of money. So when the money hit, the money actually came down at the end of 2006. So they're developing the program. It was called the Road Home for Hurricane Katrina and Rita recovery efforts. So they're trying to get this program up and running, and the governor's making a mad push because she wants to get funding out to all the people. So she says, write them checks. And the contractor says, okay, you're the governor, whatever you say. So they come up with calculations. They start writing checks out to people. You could get up to $150,000 in assistance. You're writing a check to somebody for $150,000 based on their eligibility, and based on the amount of damages they had, you're giving 150 G's to people who have no one, I mean, unless you're uber rich, nobody's ever held $150,000 in their hand at any one time. That's insane money, but you're giving it to people who lost everything. And so they were supposed to go fix their houses. And what we found out over the years is that most people obviously didn't spend the money to fix their houses. So the lesson HUD learned there, and HUD is always learning lessons, is you don't give people cash. Don't give them checks. The lesson HUD learned is that you fix a house. It's better to fix the house and give somebody money, because the money is supposed to go to repairs for the house. The only way you can ensure that happens is by getting control of that process and having contractors go do the work and pay the contractors for doing the work. So we learned a really hard lesson. For Katrina, we took in 240,000 applications. 134,000 people were eligible for the program. At one point in time, we were running at a 40% default rate on Katrina of people that didn't do what they were supposed to do with the funding we gave them. Luckily, HUD stepped in and said, hey, you know what? We didn't realize it's partly on us, so let's find a way to help these folks. So we did. We started to get construction contractors involved and flip the program to where we're out there fixing houses. But that was a lesson learned as far as that went. And that's critical because we are constantly learning lessons in disaster recovery. So fast forward to 2017, Hurricane Irma, one all y'all are familiar with. Irma makes landfall as a Cat 4 on September 10th, 2017. She comes into the Keys, does a lot of damage in the Keys, storm surge. Then she comes up the spine of the state and loses strength. So it's a lot of wind damage, like roof damage and type stuff. But she did a funny thing when she got up towards Jacksonville, she kind of boogied off the coast a little bit and caused storm surge. So you had substantial storm surge in Jacksonville and St. Johns counties. So $50 billion in damage from Irma. 48 of 67 counties in Florida were impacted by Irma. When you throw Michael and Sally into that, I think there's only one county left in the whole state that's never been declared a disaster area. And it's some little county just outside of the Tallahassee area. $616 million in Cdbg disaster recovery funds allocated to the state of Florida for Irma recovery. That's the program that I ran. We built houses, we fixed houses, we did not give people money because lessons learned going all the way back to 2006 come into play. And this industry and these programs and these funding allocations are constantly evolving. We are constantly learning better ways to do things. And we're at a point now, again, funds don't ever go into anybody's hands. We fix houses. HUD issuing, the funding has got to go to fix homes, replace homes, give somebody a new mobile home, and that is a lesson that we have learned. And again, this industry is constantly evolving. So now that you guys know about this industry, and you know how the funding comes down, and you know that it is a very bright industry, one of the things we're going to hop into is professional development. This is something that is kind of a, I don't even know how you, it's just something I'm passionate about. It's kind of like my own personal soapbox issue. But personal development, because this is all about y'all graduating. Everybody wants to graduate. And then everybody wants to get a job. Otherwise, what was the point of graduating? Okay. So how do you go about doing that? How do you get where you want to be if you will, and guys, this applies not only to disaster recovery, this applies to anything you really want to do in life, okay? Number one, gain experience. When I went through school, I only had one little internship and I worked part-time jobs when I was in school. So I didn't have any experience. I had nothing. I sent my resume out and I'd get the same, this is back in the days for internet, I'd get letters back saying, no experience, no job. So it's tough, it's challenging. It's not something you want to do. Get experience. Internships that y'all do are phenomenal. Do internships. If you have an opportunity to go work for Red Cross during a disaster, do it. You will learn so much. Any organization that helps during a disaster, go do the volunteer work. It matters. You will learn terminology. You will get firsthand experience on the ground as to what happens. But again, that applies to anything you want to do, okay? Even if it's not emergency management, even if it's not disaster recovery, whatever it is, look for volunteer opportunities. They're out there all the time. They are. Seek them out. Accept them. Next thing, resume recommendations. I just stood up a program 2 weeks ago in Louisiana because I mentioned COVID is a disaster. So we have a program down here that I stood up. It is emergency rental assistance. And we're helping folks who are below that 80% AMI threshold, who are behind on rent due to COVID-related circumstances, whether it be loss of a job, reduction in hours, it could be they had substantial medical bills due to COVID. So we're here to help folks who are behind on rent. And that was all part of the CARES Act funding. So in order to do that, I've got to hire a lot of people. And I've been going through hundreds of resumes. And I can tell y'all also from the umpteen trillion resumes I looked at for the Irma project, the best advice I can give y'all is don't put bubbles, don't put cartoons, don't put silly things on your resume. I don't have time, nor does anybody else who really is looking at your resume, to figure out what the heck you're trying to say. Don't go spend $200 to somebody who's going to write a resume for you, because Microsoft Word has resume templates. They are simple. They are easy to use. They have great bullets that you bullet out your highlights, bullet out your skill set. It's not a bunch of silly colors. I mean, honestly, if I get a resume that's got all these little clouds and crap on it, I don't have time to read it. I'm sorry, because what it tells me is you're not even serious about your resume. I don't have time for that. I'm not going to go hunt through your resume to figure out what the heck you're trying to tell me. Don't waste your money on a resume writer. Please don't, because these guys charge $200, $250. Make an investment in interview clothing. It doesn't cost that much to dress nice for an interview. The internships that I would interview students for in Florida, I would have people coming in club clothes. Club clothes ain't interview clothes, all right? Don't come in your all red suit, okay? Ladies, don't come in whatever you wear to the club, okay? It's great for the club. It's not great when you're trying to get a job in an office environment. Think of it, gentlemen, I promise you, you can buy a suit for less than $200. And it's a nice suit. You can go to Kohl's and get a sale on suits. You can go to Dillard's, you can go to Macy's, holy smokes. I mean, I'm a bit of a suit and coat addict. And trust me, I buy my stuff on sale all the time. It drives my wife insane. But you can get nice work clothes without spending a lot of money. You want to dress to impress. Club clothes are great for impressing people at the club. Don't wear jeans. Even if you're going to interview for an internship, dress above the position you're interviewing for. If you're a gentleman, always wear a tie on your interview. Always wear a tie. I don't care what you're interviewing for, always wear a tie. But dress to impress, don't dress for the club. Don't spend money on a resume. It's a waste. I promise you, it is a waste. Use one of the templates in Microsoft Word. Get your information across. Do it in bullets. Do it in short sentences. Highlight your internships. Highlight your volunteer opportunities. Highlight any work you have done. Seeing that you have worked in the past is a good thing. It shows that you have the ability to work, the willingness to work. That matters. Keep it focused. Focus on your skill sets. And skill sets, let me tell you, peeps, skill sets are something as easy as I know Excel. Okay? There are a lot of things out there that people take for granted, and highlighting these skill sets matters. When I look at a resume, I'm looking at it because I may have 3 or 4 positions I'm looking at. This resume not fit what they submitted for, but if I see somebody can use Excel, somebody knows how to use Smart Sheets, somebody knows Access, something like that, or somebody has managed people in the past. I don't care if it's working at Shoe Carnival. If they manage people, that matters. And if I see that, then I know that I may not be able to use them for this thing, but I've got this other thing over here I can use them for. And it really helps. The other thing, and Stefan can send out my email and my information to everybody. Start your LinkedIn if you hadn't already. Start networking. Okay, networking matters. If nothing else, you pick up a lot of valuable information and people start to know who you are. So by all means, please set up your LinkedIn accounts if you've not done so. The final thing that I encourage everybody on this call to do is join FEPA. FEPA was created in 1956 to help professional emergency managers work to protect the state of Florida. There's more than 600 members, local, regional, state, and federal, and tribal organizations. Okay, so it is the Florida Emergency Preparedness Association. For somebody like me, the membership is $100. For students, it's $25. Join. You get invited to all the meetings. You get invited to the conferences. Join FEPA. Please join FEPA. I've got in this picture on the screen, I've got a couple coworkers who are there, who are big into FEPA, former coworkers. It is worth doing, especially given the fact that you are all in Florida. Join FEPA, guys. It's $25. It is well worth your time and your money. That being said, Stefan, that's all I got. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, no, that was great. Thank you, Mike. So much to learn from there. Yeah, floor's open, guys. Ask some questions. Ask away. Don't be shy.
And if you don't, you're not going to hurt my feelings. So, but I do encourage all of you. Look, and I mean, I'm a relatively plain and blunt person. It is hard when you graduate. There are a lot of challenges in finding jobs. Okay, we all go to school and think, man, I'm going to graduate and I'm going to get this job making $100,000 a year, and I'm going to be just crushing it nonstop. And you get out there, and suddenly, first couple of times, your dreams are shattered. You're like, what the heck, man? Why do I even bother to go to school? What is this all about? There is a process in life. So get out there. If opportunities arise, it may not be financially the opportunity you want, but if financially it takes care of you where you are right now, take it. Get your foot in the door, okay? It doesn't do any good to hold out, because I promise you, there's no company out there looking for that person who graduated college 5 years ago that's holding out for the perfect job, because you just wasted 5 years of your life. So if you get an opportunity and you're able to take care of yourself financially, you're not looking to go buy a cigarette boat, okay? You're not looking to go do something fancy at this point in time, but it takes care of you. Get your foot in the door. Take it for the experience. The other thing I'll tell you guys in disaster recovery, one of the great things you can be is mobile. Disaster, I showed you all the sheet. Disasters hit everywhere. They hit everywhere. There's going to be a point in time, fingers crossed, real soon, where most of us are all vaccinated and we can travel again. So being mobile is a good thing. But I will also tell you, because I know people who are diehard, dedicated the rest of their lives to Tallahassee. At least you're in a state capital. And when there are disaster recovery programs, the program management is all done from the state capital. So it's not a bad place to be at all. But again, take advantage of the opportunities that are thrown your way. Do it. You guys, there's a phenomenal program. I'm impressed as hell with Florida State and what it is they do on this. And the interns that I've worked with, that's the other thing. Keep an eye out for intern programs. And I'm not trying to pimp my competition, but IAEM, which is who I worked for before I had an opportunity to come home, we set up a phenomenal intern program. It's awesome. I mean, we did a phenomenal job. The interns we brought in, I can't speak well enough about them as to how great they performed and the things that they have learned It's an awesome opportunity. So if you see IAEM posting for interns, apply. And then when you apply, you can tell them that you had the unfortunate happenstance to listen to me for an hour and change one night. So, and that'll actually probably help your odds of getting the internship, because I know who runs it. But yeah, just, it's a great industry. It's great opportunities out there. And if you like to go into it, great. If you don't, you do something that kind of runs parallel to this, that's awesome too. I mean, it really truly is. It's a whole new world out there in disaster recovery. So, but I appreciate y'all's time tonight. Thank you all. Thank you for the hour and 20 minutes that you let me ramble on.
No, yeah.
I have a quick
Thank you so
question.
much.
Welcome. Go ahead, guys. Ask some questions.
What was standing up that rental assistance program that you mentioned? What was that like?
Yeah, it was interesting. So what's happening right now, you presumably a lot of y'all have heard about the CARES Act, and that's federal funding coming out of the Treasury Department to help with COVID-19 assistance. It's coming down in a multitude of ways. It initially came down to help with temporary hospitals and all that good stuff. But now we're kind of in this weird long-term assistance type part of COVID where a lot of people are behind on rent. And you don't want people getting evicted, because the reality is, where are you going to go? If you get evicted, where are you going? You got nowhere to go. You're not going to get a reference from your last apartment because you just got evicted. So it's preventing evictions. So what happened in Louisiana and in a lot of other states, you receive this funding, and all states have received it. Okay, so there's funding for emergency rental assistance, and it comes down. And in Louisiana, we have parishes, not counties. So the parish gets an allocation of funds, and they reached out to us for an emergency procurement, which means they didn't have to go through the regular RFP or ITN process of putting it out to bid. It was an emergency procurement. They knew exactly how much they were going to pay us to do the program and said, make it work for this amount of money. Like, okay. So we did. And so in a matter of 2 weeks, we had to come up with a website. We had to come up with a processing system. We had to come up with location. We had to come up with all of our equipment that we need, computers, printers, all that good stuff to stand up an office and get this thing up and rolling in 2 weeks and launch a website and launch a program. Normally, if this was a hurricane program, I'd have 90 days to do this. Hey, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. I mean, I launched a program across the entire state of Florida in like 45 days, and that was a struggle. I did this in 2 weeks. And I say it really was all the other people that worked for me. So again, creating the website, getting policy drafted, which is an absolute nightmare because Treasury has their own policy as opposed to HUD and Fema. So you have to get acclimated with Treasury policy and learn how to write Treasury policy to accommodate this program. And that's another thing. So if policy and stuff like that is something you're interested in, I would encourage all of you to go. FEMA offers free courses online. HUD offers free courses online. Take the courses because, and I'm not saying this negatively, but policy wonks, that's what we call them in this business. Those guys are in high demand. People that know policy, that can spout policy off the top of their head. I'm not that guy. I can go stand up a program. I'm real good at pointing. I can point and tell somebody, go do this, go do that. I know what needs to be done. You try to sit here and throw out a policy question to me, I can answer some pretty easy high level ones. But if you want to get in some nitty gritty, now you better go talk to my policy wonk because I don't know the answer. So, but yeah, Alexandra, it was, standing up that entire program and then start taking applications. So the program got announced on the news and the website was given. So now you got all these renters who are applying for the program. And so now all the folks who are behind on rent are applying, and we're in the process of gathering the income documentation and proof that they're living where they say they live. So we can make sure and then go pay. The program pays up to 15 months. So what it does, it'll pay up to 12 months in arrears, plus another 3 months going forward if you fit the right criteria. So that's, again, COVID's opened up, from a business perspective, I know so many people got laid off, but COVID has opened up a lot of avenues and opportunities for people to jump into this as well. So the other thing, we have a contact tracing contract for the state of Louisiana. So we do contact tracing. We also provide testing kits for Carnival Cruise Lines. So it's not just hurricanes, it's disasters in general, and COVID's a disaster.
Hey, Mike, this is William Garcia. I just graduated back in December, and I've been working on some environmental remediation in the meantime, and kind of been looking out in a lot of different states. And, you know, other than the normal application processes, I've been trying to network a lot. Do you have any advice for, like, if I just reach out to, you know, certain department, you know, emergency managers or heads to say, you know, just say that I have interest in that department? Because I learned a lot of times people are usually have vacancies, but those always kind of open up internally. And, you know, I'm trying to be able to, like, kind of put a name to a face instead of being, you know, a stack of in a resume in a, you know, in front of them.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, William. What I would do, my recommendation would be to get on LinkedIn. There are a lot of, so there are environmental review specialists in this business. They, again, it's kind of like a policy wonk. If you're tied to something specific like environmental, it provides good opportunities. But you're right, a lot of times it's about getting to know someone. So what I would do is get on LinkedIn and I would search for people that are environmental review specialists. So my suggestion, if you want, again, all of you are welcome to hit me up on LinkedIn, and I accept everybody, because that's what somebody told me to do one time. So, you know, I accept everybody on LinkedIn, but and then you're welcome to search through my list of people and see who's environmental review specialists. But that's what I would do, because I would hit up for what you're wanting to do. There are some companies, and the names that I would look for would be, there's a company called Environ. There's a company called Tetra Tech. There's a company called NERIS, N-E-R-I-S. Those are all three environmental review companies. And I would hit them up on LinkedIn. And when you hit them up, put them in and say, hey, look, FSU graduate, looking to get into the field. Please keep me in mind for any openings. And they do work all over the country.
I am familiar with Tetra Tech, and, you know, and I've been, from the work I do now, I'm more of like a contract employee with several different companies, because I go remove, we do unexploded ordnance, you know, so I do like part of the physical labor of it. And so I'm trying to maneuver from this field into the emergency management kind of field more so. And the only internship experience I had was in the recovery department at the FDM. So I was really kind of looking, you know, into that, but I like your realistic perspective about the work, because that's what I learned, more so that it's so vast, you know, and so it was a lot to really take in just the summer internship program. But I realized how important it is to do that, and for all the other people coming in to try to learn that. And like you said, I felt like there's a little kind of disconnect there from school to the field, you know, but I always feel like I work best, you know, just with that kind of hands-on approach.
Yeah, I would definitely, you're familiar with Tetra Tech, see if they have any opportunities. They always do. But again, there are others out there. So I would look, I know NERIS does work in Texas. They do work in Florida. They do work in New York. Environ is mostly centered around the Gulf Coast states. They're a big one. ELOS is another one. They're based in Louisiana. They have a lot of environmental review contracts. So there's, and when I say environmental, it's kind of, it opens up a broader door in the sense that within the environmental, it's doing environmental assessments on property is one thing. Okay, but it also can open the door to lead-based paint testing or abatement, which is a big thing. That's a huge thing, because any house that was built before 1978 in a disaster program is required to be tested for lead-based paint. And there's a lot that goes into that. It's going out to the house, taking samples, shooting there's a little gun that can detect it, doing things like that. But then there's also the folks who have to do the actual testing of the samples itself to determine if there was lead or not, and then writing the reports. So there is opportunity out there. I can tell you that this is one of those fields that if you land in, it is really a career. There aren't that many folks out there that do that. And the ones that are lucky enough to do it, that's all they do, and they are always in demand. So it is a good choice, absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mike. I really appreciate your time today.
No problem.
By the way, I wanted to say that one of our speakers later this semester will be Allison McCleary, who recently served as the Recovery Bureau Chief over at the Florida Division of Emergency Management. She now recently started a position with Tetra Tech. So we'll actually hear more about that later this semester.
Yeah, William, that'd be a good one to connect with too. So yes.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
And would anyone else like to ask you a question?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Mike. My name's James. I'm actually a master's student at the Public Administration program here at Florida State. I'm going to graduate in about a month with my master's degree with a concentration in emergency management. And I'd like some advice in terms of like how I can put myself out there for policy, because that's one of the things that I really like. I absolutely enjoy policy. I read the Federal Register, no one's holding a gun to my head in that sense. I read the Federal Register just to know what's going on in the federal government and see what's going on and all that. So I really like policy and like to know how to get involved. I've got 2 internships so far that I'm currently working in addition to full-time at school. So any advice or direction you could point me in would be excellent.
Yeah, so number one, I'm going to go back to LinkedIn, and I'm not a huge social media guy. I'm awful at it, but LinkedIn is actually very valuable, and it does put you in touch with other policy people. I would also recommend, and again, I'm not trying to pimp out my competition. However, I do want to see people succeed from a policy perspective. I would look at ICF International. They're based in Fairfax, Virginia. They do recovery work all over the country. They are a very large organization. They were the ones who had the first road home contract and were not invited to come back to Louisiana. But that was more political. That's Louisiana politics for you, okay, more than anything else. It wasn't because ICF did everything they were ever asked to do and did it tremendously. And it's a shame that sometimes somebody gets a bad, until you're behind the scenes and know what goes on. But ICF is one that truthfully, they are known for policy. ICF also has a contract with HUD. So they have a policy contract with HUD. They are responsible for making policy updates for HUD. So if I was going to go policy-wise, I'd look at ICF and see what opportunities they have. There is a lady, and I would hit her up on LinkedIn. Her name is Brandy Bones. She is a national HUD policy guru. She is literally a walking encyclopedia of policy knowledge. And she oversees all of the policy for ICF. And she is somebody well worth hitting up. And just say, hey, look, student at FSU, Mike Gaskins used to work at ICF. He recommended I hit you, I make a connection with you, and here's what I'm interested in. So yes. Now she may tell you some silly story that, well, I tried to get Mike to go to Puerto Rico and he wouldn't go. And that's not a silly story. It's actually true, but it's still, it is still worth it. She is somebody absolutely valuable to hit up on LinkedIn. And kind of the same thing, James, start, set up an Indeed profile. I'm not saying chunk your resume up on Indeed or anything, but definitely set up a little search criteria for policy. HUD policy is kind of like keywords. and it'll help identify opportunities for you. But if I was a policy guy, I'd go work for ICF.
That sounds really excellent. I'll definitely be sure to contact Miss Bones and, you know, tell her that you gave me the inside scoop about Puerto Rico. Thank you very much.
Yeah, bye.
Would anyone else like to ask anything?
I have a quick follow-up question. I apologize. I like dropped off the call. Zoom keeps kicking me out and I don't know why. But the reason I asked the question about the rental assistance program is because I am going to be part of standing up the same program, I believe using the same system that you developed in Alabama. So do you have any advice for that? I'm very new.
So my system's in Louisiana, not Alabama. So probably not quite, may not be the same. But my advice on it is keep the application simple. Don't complicate the application. Because what happens is grantees, which would be the county or the city or the state, whomever your grantee is on this, they're going to go find some standardized application. And there's a way to take an 8-page application and really make it a 3-page application. So don't complicate the application. Follow Treasury guidance. You're not reinventing the wheel, okay? So follow Treasury guidance. Also make sure that you have an income worksheet that you can use. That's critical because you have to be able to calculate the income correctly. So make sure you've got somebody on the IT side who can go pull. So is it a county level program or a city level?
Yeah, it's county level. I was told, and I'm so new to this, so I really have no clue, but I guess it's the same website maybe, or similar website. They're recreating it for this county. I'm not quite sure, but yeah, there was some connection to Louisiana.
Right. Okay. So what you want to make sure you do is you utilize somebody who's really good at developing worksheets, because you have to have an income calculator, which is basically an Excel worksheet that's got the formulas built in behind it. But you're grabbing, so if it's Leon County, you're grabbing, excuse me, the Leon County income requirements for HUD for 80% AMI, and you ought to populate that. So when you do a calc and you're typing in somebody's income, it's automatically going to let you know what their AMI percentage is. That's the most time-consuming aspect of all that. And also make sure that you're still required to have proof. So in any program, you have to have proof. What you're going to find, and what y'all are going to have to push back on to some degree, is you have nonprofit organizations that rely on grants to survive, and they're going to be upset. They're going to be a little bit hurt that they didn't get this work in Leon County, okay? So they're going to try to undermine you. They're also going to try to convince you that you don't need proof. You have to have proof, because at some point you're going to get audited. And I've been through a multitude of audits, and they're easiest when you have all your documentation. So if you require evidence, proof of unemployment, proof that they were impacted by COVID, and you have all the right documentation, you're fine. You're absolutely fine. And then also expectations. So make sure that y'all set clear expectations with your grantee. A lot of times people think the money goes out instantly. They don't appreciate the process. And the reality is there's an application process, there's an eligibility process, there is a quality control process, and then there is a request for funding process. That's how every single program in the world works. You can't shortcut one of those processes. Application's all about applications. It's all determining eligibility and asking for supporting documentation. QC, you have to QC because you want to make sure it's right, because you don't want Treasury or HUD or FEMA or whomever it is that funds any given program to come knock on your door and say, oops, you owe us money for this one because you screwed up, because that'll happen. And then there's the funding request to the county. So set clear expectations. What we found in Louisiana on this particular program is we're kind of forecasting 90 days on average from application to funding for any one given applicant. So we know we can do it in less than 90, but I'd rather not tell them something lower and then not hit the deadline. So we're looking about 90 days. But that's a good thing. If you're doing it in Leon County, that's a really good thing. It'll be a neat program out there for you.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
Well, anyone else? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Actually, was that someone? Did I miss someone?
No, we're good. Keep going.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, thank you so much, Mike, for speaking to us tonight. Thank you so much for all of this knowledge and wisdom and all of this valuable advice. Definitely encourage you guys to soak this up. And there's going to be a recording of this on our YouTube channel shortly after. If you want to dive back into it again, if you missed anything. And we're also going to send out Mike's contact info and his LinkedIn and all that if you'd like to follow up with him, and highly encourage you to network with him. And so thank you once again, Mike. Wonderful talk. Round of applause for Mike.
I appreciate y'all. Enjoy the heck out of it, man.
Oh, we will for sure.
All right. Well, thank y'all. You guys have a great evening and be successful in whatever you do. Focus on it and you will be.
Yes, thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you very much. Have a good night.
See ya.